Okay, everyone. Good to be here. Welcome out to session number 47. As I put these together, I think, how can I have put together 47 sessions? And I think I have more questions than when I started the first one. You should have the answers by now, but it raises more questions. So today is May the 7th, 2024. So some of my family spent part of the day together. 10 years ago today, our dad died. And in some ways, it seems like a long time ago. In some ways, it just seems like yesterday. So we gathered at the cemetery, sang a few songs, and had a nice lunch at the fruit yard together. Went down memory lane some. So, time goes on. Gary Sr. was telling me about some history books that he has, and I was looking through them, and names he hadn't thought of for years and years, start coming back to his mind because he's reading about them in the history. And I said, well, that's the way life goes. I mean, same thing's going to happen to you and me. We're gone. Life goes on. People go on with their lives, and maybe once in a while they'll bring your name up or, find some study of yours and say, hey, that was pretty good. And they'll say, when did he pass away? Was it 2 years ago? No, it was 15 years ago. Something like that. So welcome out, everyone. And before I start the lesson, I want to offer an apology to those of you who come in person. In some ways, I punish you by these handouts. Most of my early sessions were more outlines, more skeleton kind of outlines, and then you would fill in what you wanted to fill in as you went. I think that probably kept you more engaged. Probably a better way to present in person. But then when I would send it out to everyone in my mailing list, like over 100 different people or so, and I don't know how many they pass it on to, I would attach this more complete document, because when they're watching it at home, I would want them to kind of follow what I'm saying in print in more detail than the outlines. And then there are some who often never watch the video or listen, but they print out this handout, and then they open their Bibles and they're going through the document, and then they're studying in the Bibles. And so I always felt the need to make a more complete document for that type of person. And so I would give you an outline, and then later I would send out a more complete one. Well, probably 10 or 12 sessions ago, I just went straight to the more detailed one, which puts you at a little disadvantage because, you get 2 pages and it's full of words and full of verses, and you're kind of trying to go down through it with me, and maybe something catches your attention, then you kind of stay there. Then I'm moving on, and then you got to, okay, where is he now? You're kind of skimming through, trying to catch up. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe I stop at a point to focus on it, and then you're reading ahead, and then you got to go back and try to find where I'm at. So I apologize. This is not the best way to present in person. But I'm just skipping all these extra steps and just thinking about the end product of those out there that might, and maybe some of you, go home and you sit down with the more complete one and you start studying, and you're able to understand my points better by having more of a narrative instead of an outline. So anyway, I understand that, and you keep coming back, so it must not be too major of a problem for you. This is part 3 of 2 Thessalonians 2. And as I said, maybe the first one, I don't know that I've studied any chapter of the Bible more than 2 Thessalonians 2, especially the first 12 verses. There's only 12 verses, You look up every Greek word 15 times, all that kind of stuff. But there's so many different opinions about it, and there's so many different directions you can go with it. because 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 12 is Paul's summary or synopsis of the entire book of Daniel and Matthew 24. And he compresses it into 12 verses. So it's very dense and it has a whole lot to say. And so I broke it down into three parts. The first part was from verse 3, what is the apostasy? And I concluded that the apostasy is described in verse 4, where the Antichrist goes into the temple, declares himself to be God, and basically rebels against everything there is about God and God's people. Or another way of saying it, the reason I think verse 4 is the answer to verse 3, what is the apostasy or rebellion, is because he's simply doing on earth what his father Lucifer did in heaven. So his father Lucifer in heaven attempted a rebellion and was cast out. Now he has a chance to repeat himself by incarnating his man and attempting to do the same thing again on earth. So if you look at it that way, it helps understand why I conclude the great falling away is maybe not the best translation of it, but it's a rebellion. Now, when he does that and institutes the mark of the beast and declares himself God, that does draw a line where people on the earth will have to decide where they stand. And there will be many people at that time fall away because they had a false faith or just whatever, for whatever reason. They're going to give in to the system rather than stand firm in the faith. And so the typical answer to what is the falling away is true. But I think that's secondary. I think the primary thing that Paul's trying to get across is that verse 4 describes what the rebellion is. See, I'm trying to put the answers to the questions in the text, not trying to figure out outside the text. The second part of this study dealt with verse 6 and 7, what and who is the restrainer. And I also concluded verse 4 is the answer to that. And the way I came to that conclusion is very simple. By God's design, not by his own power. And this is the part people have to get over. Because they say, well, you're saying the Antichrist is more powerful than Christ if he's the restrainer of Christ. No, I'm saying God designed that verse 3 must happen before verse 2. Therefore, verse 3 stands in the way, prevents verse 1 from coming to pass. That's by it's all in God's plan. So the what is restraining is the mystery of iniquity in verse 7. And the who of restraint, the restrainer, is the man of sin in verse 3. So there's a person and there is a system, a thing, a restraint and a restrainer. And I think both of those are right in this text. That the mystery of iniquity, the whole system of evil, must reach its fullness in God's plan before he comes and put a stop to it. So that's standing in the way of the two events of verse 1 happening. And then the man of sin is the face of this mystery of iniquity. And he has to come to full power before Christ comes and puts a stop to it. And so it makes sense to me that if the question is asked maybe this way, because one important way you get to a proper conclusion is to frame the question correctly. So if you frame the question as what stands in the way of verse 1 taking place? And if you ask it that way, people are reading this, they say, well, obviously, the two events of verse 3 are standing in the way because that verse says they must happen first. God designed it that way. So to me, it's just a real it's a more straightforward, clear, direct answer to those questions than all of the many answers that you'll find out there if you go study this. And it is very much a minority view. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised because this is just the way things work. But I knew even among my own brethren, this is very much a minority view. I don't know of anyone else that sees it quite this way. Yet I never got one response. And yet I know how many people get the documents, they watch the videos, they talk about it and so forth. But that's just the way it is in this internet world, where all day long you're looking at information, but you hardly ever feel the need to respond to it. And so I don't know what anyone thinks about the lesson I presented last time. But that's okay. And it's out there. People will study it, come to their own conclusions. Part 3 is one I really wanted to zero in on tonight, the coming deception of Antichrist. And so in 2Thessalonians 2, verse 3 is where it is first mentioned. And as I say in the first part below the first line, 2:3 is a direct quote of Jesus in Matthew 24:4. So 2:3 says, "Let no one deceive you by any means." Jesus said in Matthew 24:4, "Take heed that no one deceives you." Do you think Paul was thinking of the words of Jesus when he wrote this? Okay, I'm going to quote it almost directly, just a little bit slightly different, but it's basically the same thing. So that's 2:3, and then in 2:10 is the other text verse for tonight. Verse 9 says, "The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders, with all unrighteous deception." So I guess there is a righteous deception, because this says unrighteous deception. Well, what is the righteous deception? That's in verse 11. God will send them strong delusion, because the word delusion in many ways means the same thing as deception. You're deluding somebody or deceiving them. But God's deception is a righteous deception. And Antichrist and Satan's deception is for the purpose of unrighteousness, evil. So basically, in these 12 verses, you have the idea of deception brought up 3 times. Verse 3, and then verse 10 about the Antichrist, and then verse 11 about God himself. And I like to say that, there is escaping Antichrist deception. But when God sends you deception, that's it. There's no way out of that one. But when God sends strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that's the end of it for them. So in this short passage, the idea of deception is brought up 3 times. Do you think Paul has this as kind of like his central warning or thought is about deception? And he gets that idea from Jesus in Matthew 24, who uses the word deception or deceive 4 times. So the whole ongoing theme in Matthew 24 is deception. And I wanted to, this whole big first paragraph is basically referencing many verses that talks about deception, especially regarding the end times. And we'll be looking at some of these on the second page, so I won't turn and read all of these. But I wanted to put them all together in one paragraph just to show the sheer number of them, the sheer weight of that in the entire Bible discussion of the end times is this weaving all the way through. Beware of deception. Beware of deception. Now, how do you beware of deception? Well, we'll try to talk about that tonight, because as I wrote in the board, the thing about deception is very deceptive. How do you detect deception? If deception is really good, you don't know you're being deceived. So I started the second paragraph by saying maybe the most difficult part of this session, how do you describe deception when deception by its very nature is not clear? Most of the time, if it's good, you do not know you're being deceived. And you're shocked when you find out you are. But going back to that first paragraph, I give the 4 times in Matthew, many will come in my name and will deceive many. Not just a few, he's going to deceive many. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. 24:24, many false Christs and false prophets. Isn't it interesting that even though he says many, because there has been many through history, the way the Bible works often on a very large subject is then it'll reach its culmination with a final dramatic example of it. So in this case, false Christs and false prophets. Doesn't Revelation 13 talk about a final false Christ and a final false prophet? So the ultimate example of what he's talking about in 24:24 is Revelation 13. Will arise and show great signs and wonders. And one thing I want you to notice, these 2 pages, is not so much how often, but it is several times, but deception is connected to signs and wonders. Signs and wonders. I don't know what the percentage is now. I know it's still a very high percentage, something I think over 50% of the largest mega churches in the world are of the charismatic, Pentecostal, signs and wonders branch of Christianity. It basically only started as a church movement kind of a thing around 1900. I mean, even when we were kids, Pentecostals were kind of like weirdos and outcasts and way out, holy rollers and all that kind of stuff. And, 50, 60 years later, they're the largest mega churches. They own the TV stations. They have great wealth, signs and wonders. Isn't it interesting that Jesus said, as a build-up to my return, deception by using signs and wonders will be prominent. And we're seeing it today. Let me see. To deceive, if possible, even the elect. That tells us that it's near total deception. I mean, this idea of almost even the elect is just a way of saying it's almost 100% by the time Jesus comes back. A very small number who escape it. 2Thess 2:9 we already read, but I did underline with all power. See, that's the idea of Antichrist is incarnated Satan. So Satan's able to put his full deceptive power into one man. With all power, signs, and lying, the old King James says, false, pseudo is the Greek word, so we understand that, wonders. So are they real or are they false? Well, it says in Revelation, we'll look at, even calls fire down from heaven. Is it real fire? Probably so. So are this says power, signs, and false, and you might even apply false to all 3 of those, power, signs, and wonders. So it wouldn't just be false wonders, but real power and signs. It's applied to all 3 words. I don't think it'll matter whether false or real. I mean, we're in the age now, aren't we? With AI and however that's going to advance, it's going to look real. Whether it's real or not, everyone's going to think it's real. That's the deception. Including, but they will appear true, including his death and resurrection event of Revelation 13, verses 3 and 12. Now, that seems to be a real death. It calls it his mortal wound. So it doesn't say like it appears to be a mortal wound. It calls it a mortal wound. Now, the coming back to life part is the part that we don't know. Is it real? Or it will just appear to be real? so that everyone will think it's real, and then they'll follow after it. So the thing about good deception is it really doesn't matter whether it's real or not. The deception is everybody's going to think it's real. In Revelation 13 and 14, this is about the false prophet. He performs great signs, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs. Again, how does he deceive? By appearing to do great miracles and signs and wonders. And evidently, no one is going to be able to prove him wrong so that it will be accepted as true. By which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast. Then we go back to Daniel 8:25. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper. I don't like that, do you? Deceit prospering? Well, it's kind of prospering right now, isn't it? Daniel 11:21, he shall come in peaceably. I wanted to underline that because that's the deception. He will come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue, or the old King James says flatteries, which means smooth or slippery. You can't really tell it's a lie. Daniel 11:23, after, underlined again, the league, which that is the covenant of 927 of Daniel, that's seven-year covenant. But they call it a league because they don't consider it a covenant. Israel will consider it a covenant. But Antichrist and his group, and I guess the rest of the world, will just consider it another league. It's, you just sign it and intend to break it when you can't. Is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. Daniel 11:24. He shall devise. It's interesting, the old King James says forecast. Now, devise is more like deception, but I kind of like the word forecast too, because isn't it interesting in the Muslim world, especially, that many of their atrocities they forecast ahead of time? They brag about it before they even do it. And I wonder if there's going to be something about him that he's going to predict or forecast what he's about to do, and then he's going to be able to pull it off. He's going to devise it. His plans against the strongholds. No wonder Jesus told us to go to Daniel, Matthew 24:15, because his 4 times of warning of deceit, Matthew 24, is primarily about the Antichrist, but the interesting thing is he doesn't name him in Matthew 24. He goes into great details about the return, leading up to his return, but he doesn't mention Antichrist. All he says is, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. So it's standing, so it's a man. That's about as close as it gets to naming the Antichrist. But then he basically says, but if you want to know more about this man that's standing in the holy place, go over to Daniel. There's a lot over there about him. Interesting. It's kind of like, why didn't Jesus really go into detail about him? Well, first of all, it's already over there in Daniel. Second of all, it's like Jesus' way of saying, don't just limit yourself to Matthew 24. I want you to go to other parts of the Bible. Go over there if you want to learn more. So maybe the most difficult is, how do you describe deception when deception by its very nature is not clear? It is a lie painted as truth. So let's go to 2 Corinthians. This is a very familiar passage, but I think this passage is going to become much more important in the future, because this will be what is taking place. 2 Corinthians 11:13. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. We're much more confident about ourselves that we can detect deception. Aren't we? Oh, I can't be fooled that easily. Oh, yes, you can. We all are fooled pretty easily. And so if someone is able to transform themselves into an apostle of Christ, how do you know? No wonder Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Well, how do you know an angel of light is a true angel or a false angel? If it looks like an angel of light. So that's this idea of, doesn't matter if it's false or real, it will appear real, and you will be convinced it's real because of deception. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. They'll get theirs in the end. But before they get theirs, people will receive them as ministers of righteousness. You know, they're not going to be like satanic occult preachers. They're going to be using the Bible. They're going to be saying good things. For the deception to work, it must be that way. Revelation 12:9 in the middle of that second paragraph. Let's turn over to Revelation 12 and read that in a better context. Revelation 12, this is when Michael cast him out for good. This is in the middle of the 7 years. So then he is cast to the earth having great wrath, and that's why we go right into chapter 13 of what does the dragon do when he's cast to the earth? Well, he has a false Christ and a false prophet to work through. So he's going to focus on them. But in verse 9, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. There's that deception again. And he's the great deceiver. And now he's going to put all of his energy into one man, or a man in the false prophet. That's a lot of power. That's why Paul said, all power, signs and wonders. And then it goes on to talk about some of his evil deeds. I wanted to look at what Jesus said of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:15, because it's a principle that's been true for 2,000 years now. But again, the ultimate expression of this will be the false Christ and false prophet. Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. Well, the problem is we can't see inwardly. We see outwardly. And if all we're seeing is a man in sheep's clothing, probably we're going to accept him as a sheep. You can't always detect the real motives in the person's heart. And so you'll know them by their fruit. So eventually the truth comes out, but only after millions of people are deceived and accept him as a true minister of righteousness. Then in Revelation 13:11, this describes the ultimate expression of that idea Jesus just brought up. 13:11. Then I saw another beast. This is the false prophet coming up out of the earth. So the Antichrist in 13:1 comes up out of the sea, and the false prophet comes up out of the land. It's interesting that the Old Testament talks about Leviathan and Behemoth. And we normally make them, the great sea creatures like whales and everything. And then dinosaurs or whatever make the great land creatures. And that may well be what they are in general. But isn't it interesting? One is a monster of the sea and one is a monster of the land, or giant creatures of the sea and of the land. And now in the false Christ and false prophet, one is from the land and one is from the sea. So even like Leviathan and Behemoth of the Old Testament finds its ultimate final display in some sense in the false Christ and the false prophet. I just find it interesting that it says one came from the sea and one from the land. I don't know what you make of that, but I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, or a ram it would be with horns, I guess, but a lamb, a sheep, spoke like a dragon. So it's the idea of looking like one thing, but really being another. Then since we're in Revelation, I have 16, verse 13 and 14. This is a real, to me, fascinating. To me, this kind of, I'll get into this more next session. I'll be going through the book of Revelation, looking at how does the mystery of iniquity, what does it look like in the book of Revelation? So we're going to do that next session. But this is kind of like the heart of it. 16:13. I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So that's where we find the evil trinity. We have a holy trinity and we have a evil trinity. So again, this idea of trying to imitate or copy the truth. But it says in verse 14, these spirits, these three unclean spirits like frogs that come out of the evil trinity, they are spirits of demons. And these spirits of demons are performing signs. So it's not just Antichrist and the false prophet. There's others performing signs. They are demonic, which go out to the kings of the whole earth, the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty, which we see as Armageddon. So I say that there's going to be lots of demonic activity during Antichrist time. And those demonics will have great power and perform great signs. The evil spirit world will be unleashed on the earth, and the results will be devastating. Can you imagine the full force of the evil spirit world? Because in some sense, God is allowing this to happen because he is accelerating on purpose. He's accelerating evil reaching its greatest point so that he can step in and put a stop to it. But he wants it to reach a certain point first. So he allows things like this so that it kind of speeds up evil so that he can put a stop to it. So I give some examples, and maybe after we close during discussion time, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts, and you may add some of your own ideas. But I just thought of some current potential examples of great deception. One, we saw great deception during COVID, lies told as truth, and most went along without question. This will be COVID-like deception on steroids, governments and media lying to us. So, I don't like to get into the discussion of did they know what they were doing ahead of time and were using this as a trial run for the future? And it's a real common opinion. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that's what came out of it. They learned that they could. And so once government learns how to control a group of people, they're going to use it again, but figure out how to do it even better. So government learned a lot during COVID. And they learned how to manipulate people, to spread information. Now they have no problems even admitting that a lot of it was wrong. But the ends justified the means. We didn't want people going into a panic, so we told them things that we knew weren't true, but we were just trying to control the situation. So, dress it up in righteous clothes. And I think the Antichrist will be the master of that. Deception is now almost totally complete in the Muslim world. They serve a false god. They serve a false prophet, Messiah figure. They believe that they are the true inheritors of the promises to Abraham. They truly believe that the Jews rewrote the Bible because the Jews came from the second son in both cases. They came from Isaac and Jacob, not from Ishmael and Esau. And so the Jews had to figure out a way that their forefathers would get the promises. But the real truth from Abraham is that his firstborn sons have the promises, Ishmael and Esau, and that the Jews have tried to steal it from us. They really believe this in their heart. they don't just see it as a, a means to an end. They really believe that this is the truth of the way things are. And they really believe then that the infidels, just like God told Israel, this is how it's justified, just like God told Israel to kill the infidels in Canaan land under Joshua, God is telling us that it's okay to kill the infidels. If you say it's okay for the Jews, why is it okay for us? So, they have the reasons, and they believe those reasons. So they'll be convinced the only solution is the total elimination and defeat of Jews and Christians. I mean, isn't that what God told Israel? I want total elimination of the Canaanites. That they are doing God obedience as much as Saul of Tarsus believed it before his conversion. And in that is their desire for Jerusalem. They do not want Israel to have control of Jerusalem. And then Israel, at the point the peace treaty is signed in Daniel 9:27, is at the fullness of their pride, having just forced their enemies to concede big things in that covenant. Pride is a central part of being deceived. I would say maybe the biggest part. You know why we're easily deceived? We have a lot of pride. If we didn't have a lot of pride, we wouldn't be as easily deceived. That's just the truth of it. Then huge distractions will be used to deceive. Forgive me if you don't agree with some of these, but to put our focus on other things, such as mass shootings with possible rioting, protests afterwards. And I'm talking about shootings that are staged, not shootings that are just random or some crazy person or some drug-filled person. I'm talking about, again, government learns from these things. So if some of these mass shootings were just random, which some of them probably weren't, but if some of them were random and then they saw the results of rioting and destruction and chaos, so that government had to come in and find the solution, they learned from them. So why not stage some of our own so we can gain more power? Certainly wars are a distraction. Using the courts as weapons against political opponents, why not? So wag the dog stuff. You know where wag the dog came from? I love being able, at this time in my life, to be able to chase these kind of rabbits when they come across things. Wag the dog came from a British play in the early 1800s where the guy was trying to tell a joke. And he said, do you know why a dog wags its tail? Because his tail can't wag the dog. It's a stupid joke. But it was in a recurring play, and so it took hold. And it took hold in the sense that it's the dog that's supposed to wag the tail, not the tail wag the dog. And so why would the tail wag the dog? It really can't, but you're noticing this tail's wagging the dog, so your attention's off the real thing. And so that's where it came from. So it just kind of built on that, where you're able to get people's focus on something over here so that they can do something over here that you really can't see or not paying attention to. So there's a whole lot of wag the dog stuff going on right now. Another deception might be all the recent talk of UFOs. Now it's called UAPs. They always have to update their difficult descriptions of things. If there is some real evidence of the reality of other beings causing real chaos, then Antichrist can use that to consolidate his power with assurances that he knows how to deal with it. The evidence may actually be, and I give Ephesians 6:12, that's the verse that says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, spiritual wickedness in high places. I wonder if what will be said to be UFOs or whatever, real creatures from other places, is that God is going to allow these principalities and powers in some way to be seen by us. Remember that story of, I'm going to say Elisha. I never know whether to say Elijah or Elisha. So the enemy was coming against the town they were in, and his servant Gehazi was all upset, worried, we're going to die. And the prophet said, Lord, open his eyes. And the Lord opened his eyes, He said, I see the armies of God on the hills surrounding us, protecting us from the enemy. So in that case, God allowed that man to see the spirit world. And I'm wondering if a lot of what's going to come down the pipe of aliens and all this stuff is simply God allowing humans to see in some way into the spirit world, and it's going to scare the daylights out of it. Because especially the evil spirits, demonic in Revelation describes them in like locusts and describes them in weird, ugly ways. Well, if they're going to have a form that is really scary, which I think, I can't prove this, but it's just interesting to me that in the last 20 years, especially 25 years, what used to be, only around Halloween time, a new scary movie would come out. Now you start looking for movies to watch, and about every other one is a horror movie of some type. And the kids are eating them up. Let's watch all these scary movies. And some of them are like really scary. Well, I don't know. I haven't watched them, but I hear people talk about it like, they're not just like ugly creatures. They're like things that get inside your head and stay with you for weeks and months, and you can't sleep and everything. They just do weird things inside of you. What if God opens up the evil spirit world to where the world, at some point, he's going to open up heaven and they're going to see the face of him sitting on the throne. So, just extrapolate from that. Maybe in a broader sense, he's going to open up the spirit world and allow humans to look into it. It's going to be presented maybe as aliens, and the world is scared to death, and then the Antichrist has an answer, and there you go. I give Revelation 9, 1 through 12, and I'm not going to take the time because I am almost out of time. Let's go on to, we'll read about the red heifer. There's a lot about the red heifer in the news now, but maybe it'll be used for deception. The transgender movement came on suddenly, has thrown most people for a loop. Men competing in women's sports and it being accepted, even promoted. We say it's crazy, but it's more than that. It's a battle in the spirit. The whole purpose is to confuse people about genders, about marriage, about everything. Just get them confused so that they're more open to deception. But God's design for marriage and genders is being undermined. Revelation 18:23, by your sorcery, all the nations were deceived. That word sorcery is pharmakia, the drug culture, legal and illegal. Create a medical crisis and offer the drug solution. Where did we see that? That's a winning combination, isn't it? Again, they learn that's a winning combination. Create a medical crisis, offer a drug solution. And when that drug then, something in that drug does something to people to where they're more open to deception, who knows? What kind of medicines can be made for people to take? When Christ destroys the Antichrist, he's really destroying what animates Antichrist, pride. Because in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, he exalts himself above God. Thus God's wrath is also directed against the pride of humans. Next paragraph. You can read that for yourself. That's kind of a personal application. But I do want to read the last sentence of that paragraph. God will use this 7 years to remove pride in Israel. And here's the part that hardly anyone thinks about. And the church. I really believe that. If he's going to present the church to himself without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, a glorious bride, a glorious church. I'm not the judge, but I know something about myself. For me to get to that condition described in Ephesians 5:27, I've got a whole lot of pride needs to be removed from my life. And I think entire churches need it. So it just doesn't want to remove pride from Israel. The church needs it as well. The parousia of Christ to gather his saints is the same parousia to destroy the Antichrist. We've gone over that. Both happened in the same unfolding event. We went over 2 Thessalonians 1, describing it. Interesting there in 2 Thessalonians 2:9, though, but the coming of the Antichrist. So he has his own parousia in 2:9. And at the very core of it is deception of 2:3. While the core of Jesus' parousia is 2:8, he's going to destroy the Antichrist with the brightness of his coming. That word brightness is epiphanion, which means to shine upon. And I give some of the Greek words it comes from. So Christ's parousia is a glorious appearing, Titus 2:13, while the Antichrist is according to the working. So let's go back to 2 Thessalonians 2. I want to show this to you. You may want to even write it down or something in your Bibles. But in 2:9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working. That word working is the Greek word energia, that we get energy from. So he's drawing his energy from Satan. So it really gives an idea of incarnation or close to incarnation, causing all unrighteous deception. Daniel 9:27, he confirms an already existing covenant, the eternal covenant of a people and a place. They're going to agree to this in that contract. Number one, Israel's right to exist. Number two, their right to exist in their land. I mean, every college campus in America seems to be saying, from the river to the sea, let Palestine be free. You think, where does that leave Israel? So you don't even want a two-state solution. You want a one-state solution, and it's not Israel. You're basically saying with that slogan, either wipe out Israel or send them to another country. They want to have a country. So in this agreement, those things are going to be agreed to. Their right to exist in their land. Number three, their right to the Temple Mount. But he agrees to what he hates as a delay tactic in order for him to gain power for the purpose of breaking it later. Deception at work right away from the start of that covenant. The best way to deceive someone is to give them what they want. Once you give them what they want, they're easily deceived. So let's go over to Daniel, look at a few verses. They were in the first paragraph, and we just skimmed over them real quick. Daniel 11:23, because these are really, to me, fascinating verses. Daniel 11:23. And after, so I would say immediately after, or at the same time that the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. So right away, as soon as he signs that 7-year agreement, he starts deceitfully plotting to break it right away. Or he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. The reason that's important is it takes away all this silly guessing of who is the Antichrist. Is it Kissinger? Is it Nixon? Is it Trump? No. He comes up peaceably with a small number of people. It's a small, insignificant country. He's a small, insignificant man. He's not a famous, powerful ruler of a big country, at least not in the beginning. That's part of the deception. Is where was this man all this time? Suddenly he has all the answers and we've never even heard his name before. I think it's going to be more like that. 11:24. At the end of 11:24, he shall devise his plans against the strongholds. I'll just not turn to some of these. 8:23, he understands sinister schemes. 8:24, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Of course, Revelation 13:2, the dragon gave him his power. 8:24, he shall destroy fearfully, or literally by extraordinary means. I don't know what that means. I think it almost means some kind of weapons or methods that we're not even aware of yet. By extraordinary means. 8:25 goes into this deception in more detail, so I will read that one. 8:25. Through his cunning, there's another deception kind of a word. is cunning. He shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. He shall exalt himself in his heart. There's 2Thessalonians 2:4. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even arise against the prince of princes. Because he can declare himself the enemy of Christ, which means, I think, he's going to declare himself the enemy of Christians. So we think it's normally Jews he's after, but Jews aren't serving the Prince of Princes. The Christians, in some way, in some measure, are trying to. So if he arises, how do you rise against the Prince of Princes when he's up there on the throne? Well, you go after his people. But he shall be broken without human means. 11:21, he shall seize the kingdom by intrigue. So all these, deception words. He is not fully known for who he is for the first 3.5 years. It is only at the pivotal midpoint that he becomes fully revealed, and then it is too late. We're not talking about the normal daily deception we all face, but a special satanic empowered deception that is very powerful and convincing. Antichrist is the ultimate, never let a crisis go to waste. One reason the first 3.5 years is unclear is because it is full of deception. The start of the covenant for 7 years may have started in secret before the public announcement of it, like most treaties. The first half of the 7 years is all about deception, false peace. The second half is about raw power. Once he has that death and resurrection event, once Satan incarnates him, once the abomination of desolation is committed, once he stops the sacrifice and breaks the covenant, it's all about raw power after that. He starts going on fighting wars everywhere. The first half will be a great test of knowing the time. This is for the saints. Daniel 12:10, the wise will understand. The first half prepares the saints for the second half. Daniel 12:11, many shall be purified, made white, and refined. How will that happen? He's going to remove pride from his church in order for it to get to this place. To become what Daniel 11:32-33 says, but the people who know their God shall be strong, carry out great exploits, shall instruct many. They shall fall by the sword of flame, captivity, and plundering. Will we reach the place? I think we will. Will we reach the place of Hebrews 10:32-39, those early Jewish Christians, where Paul said, you joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, and you endured a great struggle with sufferings. But it's only by God's grace that we can do that. And I think we will. So it's the way things are framed more than the things themselves that deceives most people. I have tried to stay away from conspiracy theories. Now I think everything is a conspiracy. I do. I think literally everything that comes along, there are people high up having meetings saying, how can we exploit this to gain more power and wealth? If leading to the return of Christ, especially in the last 7 years, is the increasing buildup of both the mystery of iniquity and the mystery of godliness to an eventual collision, then what do both look like during that time? Sessions 48 and 49 will deal with that question. So my goal the next 2 sessions is to work our way quickly through Revelation twice. One is, how is the mystery of iniquity going to manifest itself during this time, as found in the book of Revelation? Then the next session will be, how is the spirit of mystery of godliness, how does that work its way through the book of Revelation? So kind of a fast track look at Revelation. And then session 50 will be kind of a concluding gallop, I guess, through Revelation, looking at some high points. So we're going to kind of go 3 times through Revelation quickly. Instead of going verse by verse, that's how I'm going to deal with Revelation. And then we will talk about what we're going to do from there. Thank you. You can stop the video. I notice my memory on this thing is full, so I'll probably stop somewhere along the way.